I don't know if it was Kim or one of her friends, walked in on Andre Harrell getting a fellatio and was given a red a red Mercedes-Benz 300C for keeping her mouth closed behind her.
When these rappers get killed, not incidental. Somebody made $100 million and now don't have to talk to that artist or none of their crew, don't have to validate none of their contracts. Now only got to deal with the mama.
Every scandal arrives with two cuts, the version the audience is handed and the version that never survives the final edit. And the deeper you stare at it, the more that divide begins to feel intentional.
What I did was I spoke to Tim and I spoke to Kirk Burroughs. And I was like, yo, because I had Tim's number. Tim didn't know how to get into touch with Kirk. Kirk didn't know how to get into touch with Tim. But Kirk was trying to tell me, give him the number with the Tim. I said, nah, I ain't doing that. So I gave one of the producers the number in the whole 9 yards to get in touch with Tim because I want to see him get money because I know Tim got a hell of a story with Puff. So then I talked to Tim and I told him, yo, listen here, man, we should go in as a package deal. All three of us, we could tell a hell of a story about this whole documentary. You know what I'm saying? From front to start. Then whatever stuff that they get and everything like that. So yo, let's go in there and ask them for 50 a piece. You know what I'm saying? So Tim was like with it, yo, Gene, whatever, go ahead like that. Kirk was like, yeah, okay, cool, Gene. It was like a general census that we was gonna do this in a whole package deal. You know what I'm saying? And then I started speaking to the producers and everything like that, because 50 had told me himself that they was gonna spare no cost in doing this because he wanted to tell the story and he wanted to tell the story like it was supposed to be told and everything like that.
What they don't want you to know is that in an industry built on perception, chaos can be crafted just as carefully as success. People are saying that when everything looks explosive on the surface, yet strangely controlled underneath, it raises a chilling possibility that the outcome may have been mapped out long before the public ever pressed play. That is exactly why the unraveling around Diddy carries that unmistakable tension, that quiet signal hiding beneath the noise. The lawsuits, the raids, the leaked hotel footage, it all feels like a story designed to be seen, a version polished just enough to satisfy curiosity without ever going too far. But behind the carefully curated image, according to whispers online, there may be entire layers that never made it past the edit bay.
So this one night, 50 called me up and, they got him on the phone, man. He was just talking. We was talking about old time, sit down with Black Hands, sit down with, with Puff Kids, the whole Puff situation, and this documentary that he's going to be doing. You know what I'm saying? So I told him that I was going to, have Kirk and Tim. Kirk would be the one who talk about the business part of it. Tim would be the one who talk about the growing up phase with Diddy and everything and over there working in the record industry with him and stuff like that. They was like family. And I was gonna talk about, the street stuff, what was going on with Bad Boy, with the security, with Wolf, with the city college, with, the time that I knew about when I was with him up until about early 2004, something like that. But basically the streets and then the traveling with him and the atmosphere and everything. And then go back into the Notorious Big stuff with the Tupac and the whole 9 yards, all the stuff that I knew, you know what I'm saying? So we was talking and he sounded like, yo, listen here, they gonna spare no expense with this whole documentary. So I said, all right, cool.
Layers where certain names remain untouched, certain narratives stay protected, and certain perspectives are quietly set aside before they can complicate the picture. And then come the details that linger just a little too long in the background. A security figure who in his own telling was present for moments no camera ever captured, yet somehow never became a central voice. a co-founder connected to Bad Boys Foundation, who despite losing a significant stake, still appears, at least to some observers, to move carefully when it comes to how Diddy is publicly framed. Something just doesn't add up, and people are saying the more you look at it, the less it looks like coincidence. Then there's the question of control, the kind that exists behind the scenes, far away from headlines and press releases. The director, the production decisions, the quiet approvals that determine who speaks and who fades into silence. According to whispers online, some believe those choices may have been locked in from the beginning, long before audiences ever saw the final product. The public was never meant to question how those decisions were made, only to consume what remained after everything else was filtered out.
Somebody
Everything that happens
financially
in a business,
benefits.
everything that happens in a business that's based off of pretend, that seems like a setup, is.
Yes. What I'm saying is, if Jussie Smollett and Lee Daniels for a living make stories that are not real, and they make them so good that people believe them and buy them, and that's what business they're in, why would you think it would be weird if they flipped out and said a story that turned out to not be true?
Why? Why would we think that if they are capable of doing that for a living?
That's what they do for a living. They do that 300 episodes. Is take something fictitious and make it seem real. That's the business.
Katt Williams has been circling this idea for years, pointing to what he describes as patterns hiding in plain sight. In his view, this isn't randomness, it's structure, it's planning. It's a system where scandals, breakdowns, even public rivalries can feel less like spontaneous moments and more like storylines unfolding exactly as intended.
Then it's coincidental, or you would be hearing who's losing money. In all of these situations, it's only the artist that's losing. Somebody makes big money. When these rappers get killed, not incidental. Somebody made $100 million and now don't have to talk to that artist or none of their crew, don't have to validate none of their contracts. Now only got to deal with the mama, only got to see her once a year, and it's over. And the money goes up and up and up. So they killed this $20 million guy, but they reaped $60 million in benefits.
The questions that refuse to die start stacking up. Why now? Why this version? Why these voices and not others? And somewhere in the silence between the headlines, a more unsettling thought begins to form. What if the story we were given was never meant to be complete? What if the real narrative exists in the gaps, in the missing voices, in the people who never made it to the final cut? Because behind the spotlight, in those shadows most viewers never notice, people are saying there's always another script, and the deeper you go, the harder it becomes to ignore the feeling that something much bigger is being carefully kept out of frame.
They said Big had paid for his funeral through his budget. You know what I'm saying? So if anybody would know that, Kirk Burrell would know that. And I heard Wayne Barrows came out and said some shit, but to refute that. You know what I'm saying? But if Miss Wallace got a check and the check, if she got Biggie's, if they had Biggie's budget and that was taken out, money was taken out that budget for his funeral, he did use it. And if anybody knew that, Kirk Burrows would know that. It was his manager. Big had told me that he was gonna get rid of them because they didn't know what they was doing before he died. I had a conversation with Big. Big said, yo, I'm getting rid of them because they didn't want to F me up, because they didn't want to convince him to sell his publishing and his marketing to Puff. They was Puff boys. I guess they met in school or whatever like that. But Big was gonna get rid of them. But because he died and his mother didn't know the business, she kept him around for years. If you look at anything that happened with the Notorious Biggs and his camp, you see Wayne Barrows on there as executive producer. And he was just a manager of some of Big Affairs. He was executive producers of damn near everything that went on that had to do with. If Miss Wallace was the executive producer, he was the executive producer too. Look at some of the things that was done. And now he's suing trying to get money from Faith because of, he's saying that she has to pay the Wallace estate, and Miss Wallace is dead, Big is dead. If the estate is anything, it's CJ, Tatiana, and Faith. That's the estate.
He did watch the company explode, and he did end up on the outside while Diddy rode the brand all the way to billionaire status.
Then there was a situation that somebody said long time ago in the office. They caught Kirk giving Puff a fellatio in the office. Now that was the rumor that was going around. How true it is? They was lovers. It came out in his lawsuit. He tried to say that Puff was, what he said, but if somebody you, how you letting them come stay at your house every Wednesday night after the club? I think they were boyfriends, you know. I think, my honest opinion, I think Kirk was in love with Puff to a certain degree. And Puff was using him, and Kirk was giving up the bugina to him. Anything Puff asked him to do, he would do. You know, he'd go at people, he'd talk. Kirk would talk to you on the behalf of Puff. And I believe that that was his man to a certain degree in his mind. And the way he was saying documentary, you could feel that they had a relationship. He was hurt behind being Justin's godfather. He allowed Puff to tell him that he was caught up with Misa and everything like that. He believed all this I got out of it. I don't know what you and the other people got out of it. He was saying like he was a scorned lover.
But how did you find out that he gave Diddy fellatio? You know who they came from?
Well, we heard that a long time ago. Like when I was working for Bad Boy. I heard that rumor a long time ago. I was working for Bad Boy that Kurt was caught up giving him a fellatio in the office. And they got rid of one of the interns for walking in on him or something like that. You understand? But then Kurt come out in this documentary, in this lawsuit, and say he was giving Puff was making him, giving him fellatios and the bugina. That's in his lawsuit. But I guess if Cassie is a scorned lover, Kirk has the right to be a scorned lover too.
According to whispers online, the way Gene tells it, this didn't begin with chaos. It began with a call, the kind that quietly sets entire narratives into motion. In this industry, people are saying every major story starts the same way. A producer reaches out, already knowing exactly who they need and what role that person is meant to play. And in this case, Gene wasn't being brought in as background noise. What they don't want you to know is that he was positioned as a central voice, the man who had walked through every door, stood in every shadow, and witnessed the moments the public was never meant to question.
You understand? First and foremost, you got your man Russell Simmons out here dealing with these young girls. You understand? Kim Porter was one of them. She was then passed from Russell Simmons to Andre Harrell. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm just gonna give it to you. You understand? Because these we out here playing, talking all this, acting like they know what they talking about. She was working for Russell first, then she was passed over to Andre Harrell. You understand? So now Andre Harrell has her in the office and stuff like that. And it was said that it was a girl also in Uptown, and I don't know if it was Kim. I don't know if it was Kim or one of her friends walked in on Andre Harrell getting a fellatio and was given a red Mercedes-Benz 300C for keeping her mouth closed behind her. You understand? Because when Kirk Burroughs was talking about Puff did that or whatever like that, you understand? It actually happened to Andre Harrell up in Uptown Records. Kim Porter's at the desk because Andre Harrell is doing Russell Simmons a favor by giving her a job over there. Because now Russell Simmons is trying to get her friend Kamoya, because all of them was all of them was models. Kim, Kamoya, and they was young girls. So now her and Al get together and everything like that. Check this out. Kim didn't get with Puff until Puff got his deal. Because you got to realize, Misa Kim was cool. Kim didn't get with Puff until after Puff got his deal. So all that, he got her from Al and stuff like that, nah. She went with the money was, bro. She went with the money. And you could call it whatever you want to. You understand what I'm saying? That's how it was.
But the plan, at least on the surface, was bigger than just one perspective. Imagine this, 3 insiders forming a complete picture. Gene representing the streets and security, Tim holding the early years, and Kirk Burroughs tied to the business backbone of Bad Boy. A full circle narrative, 3 angles converging into one story. People are saying that together they were meant to bring depth that couldn't be easily dismissed. And yet, but is it really just a coincidence that when multiple voices threaten to expand the narrative, the structure around them begins to shift? This is where, according to Gene's version, something just doesn't add up. The tension didn't come from the face on the poster. It came from somewhere quieter, somewhere behind the scenes. The moment conversations turned toward real stakes, money, control, ownership of the story, that's when the tone changed. What they don't want you to know is how quickly the power dynamic seemed to reveal itself. The director, not the public figurehead, allegedly became the gatekeeper, the one deciding what had value and what didn't. And the more you look at it, the less it looks like coincidence.
The director, I gotta get her name, man, because it don't even sound. I want to put her on blast because she was telling me, she was saying to me that what I was asking for was crazy and they wasn't spending money like that. I'm talking about you got footage, you got clothing, you got, I was doing footage, I had pictures, all the stuff that I had, you could figure out a way to pay a brother and stuff like that. And then I was telling her about some prices that I've already received and I had the invoices to show it. And then she was calling me like I was lying. I was like, yo, who do you think you talking to? You know what I'm saying? And she was talking about, there's no way nobody paid. Nobody what? I say, first of all you people come with these documentaries and stuff, the first thing you tell me, y'all tell these people out here that y'all don't pay, and y'all pay. If you can make a picture look like $10,000, $15,000, you know what I'm saying? You can sit here and tell me that you're gonna pay me for my time sitting right down here with y'all. You understand? So then, one thing led to another, and I was like, all right, well then, F you, I spoke to 50, and then she said 50, and this is exact words that came out her mouth. 50 does not determine what goes in and goes out of this documentary. And he definitely don't pay, he determine what somebody get paid. It's not his documentary like that. I was like, oh, so if it's not his documentary and I spoke to him like that, I don't need to be doing nothing with you because I'm doing this on the strength of him. But you gonna pay me if I do it. So it went back and forth, for a little bit. And then They had Kirk Burrows giving me calls and everything like that. What are you calling me for? You know what I'm saying? I'm not, get out of here. I know what kind of dude you is anyway. Me and you cool and everything, Kirk, but don't call me about no business with this stuff like that. And then what I found out is that he was making a deal, cutting a deal for himself as well as Tim. You understand? And I was trying to get a deal for all three of us. You understand? So that's how them industry cats go. You know, that's what they do.
Gene describes a subtle but undeniable shift, like a scene rewrite happening in real time, while he pushed for fair terms, not just for himself, but for the two men he brought into the fold. Other pieces were already moving. According to whispers online, side conversations were unfolding, deals being shaped quietly, and suddenly, the man with the deepest access, the footage, the unseen stories, became the complication. Why now? Why does the most informed voice often become the most difficult one to include? People are saying this follows a pattern hidden behind the spotlight. The individual with the most layered, potentially disruptive insight is often reframed as too much, while the voices that keep things clean, digestible, and safe are elevated. The public was never meant to question that balance. It was meant to feel natural. But the questions that refuse to die remain. Who decides what version feels safe, and why is certain perspectives softened while others vanish completely? Even the personal narratives, the ones that seem emotional and human, begin to feel carefully arranged. Take the story involving Kim Porter and Al B. Sure, presented in a way that feels almost cinematic, easy to follow, easy to accept. But behind the carefully curated image, according to whispers online, alternative perspectives suggest something far more complex. Not a simple storyline of taking or losing, but a reflection of how power, influence, and ambition quietly shape decisions in this world. And still, but is it really just a coincidence that the version that survives is always the one that asks the fewest uncomfortable questions? Because at the center of it all sits a pattern that keeps resurfacing, no matter how often it's overlooked. The rise, the separation, the shift in alliances, and one figure continuing forward while others fade into the background. People are saying that when you step back and look at the full picture, it's not just about what happened, it's about what was chosen to be shown. And once you see it that way, the silence between the headlines starts to feel louder than anything that ever made it on screen. But according to whispers online, when you really listen to Gene's perspective, a second layer begins to surface, one that feels less about paperwork and more about something far harder to quantify. He doesn't just describe business decisions, he describes attachment, loyalty, and a connection that in his telling blurred the lines between partnership and something far more personal. What they don't want you to know is how emotion can quietly shape power, how someone can remain deeply tied to a system even while standing on the outside of it.
Gene paints a picture of Kirk not just as a co-founder, but as someone who, people are saying, remained bound to Diddy in ways that went beyond contracts or percentages. Through setbacks, through shifts in position, through everything that came and went, that connection never fully disappeared. And something just doesn't add up when a figure so close to the core continues to speak, but never quite crosses certain invisible lines. The questions that refuse to die start echoing louder. Is it loyalty, strategy, or something else entirely, keeping those deeper details just out of reach? So when the documentary finally reaches the public, it feels complete, but is it really just a coincidence? According to whispers online, what viewers may actually be seeing is a carefully selected voice, someone positioned perfectly in the middle, damaged enough to add weight to the story to make the central figure appear harsher, more commanding, but still connected enough to avoid exposing the layers beneath the surface. Behind the carefully curated image, the biggest financial questions, the deeper operational secrets remain exactly where they've always been, hidden in plain sight, woven between the lines the audience was never meant to question. By now, the pattern Katt is hinted at becomes harder to ignore, a system where narratives are shaped long before they reach the public, where individuals are elevated, then repositioned depending on what the story requires. People are saying that once someone stops aligning with that narrative, the shift happens quietly but decisively. And the more you look at it, the less it looks like coincidence, it looks like structure. Gene's experience, as he tells it, only reinforces that idea. The one person who claims to have seen everything suddenly becomes the most complicated to include the moment value is placed on his voice. Why now? Why does access become a problem only when it demands recognition? And standing in the middle of it all is Kirk, a figure wrapped in contradiction, co-founder, insider, narrator, and gatekeeper, offering just enough to shake perception, but never enough to unravel the entire framework. And that's where the unease settles in, because if the story we're watching is only a fraction of what exists, then what's still missing? What they don't want you to know might not be in what was said, but in what was carefully left out. And once you start noticing those gaps, those silences, those moments where the narrative feels just a little too clean, you can't unsee it. The shadows behind the spotlight begin to stretch further than anyone expected, and suddenly the real story feels like it's still waiting, just out of frame. Comment below with what you think is really going on. Leave a like if this gave you chills, and subscribe and turn on notifications for more hidden Hollywood secrets.